The spur for this was the coming release of the remixed version of Memories of Machines by Tim Bowness and Giancarlo Erra, which is February 25th, and which I'm actually looking forward to, which is rare for me. I'd usually sooner check out something new than go back to a different version of something I'm already familiar with. But I have enough respect for Bowness that I do trust that it'll be worthwhile and interesting. And thinking about that kind of crystallized a realization that has been building a little bit for the last couple of years, which is that, like the title says, I really do think that Tim Bowness is a really notably great and significantly underappreciated artist. Before I go any further, I'm Hans with Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. If you're a fan of textured, moody, thoughtful music, check us out on Bandcamp or your preferred streaming platform. So when I say Bowness is great, here is the core of where I think that comes from. On the one hand, he has this incredibly sharp eye for character and detail and lyrical sense that's very rooted in a singer-songwriter tradition. But then at the same time, he also has a sense of sonic depth and conceptual ambition that I think draws on the best of the progressive rock movement. And some other artists certainly have, aspects of both of those things or combine aspects of both of those things, but I think he's been uniquely wise about understanding how to use those two strengths to complement each other. And the way that he's fitted those two aspects of his work together, I think, have resulted in at this point, really accomplished and effective body of work. And when I say he's underrated, I think he's been quietly amassing a body of work and developing a distinctly impressive style that stands with really any of the modern luminaries of what you might call art rock or contemporary progressive rock, right? But I don't really hear him mentioned a lot of the time in the same breath as the really top-tier artists. And I talk to a lot of people who are into bands like Porcupine Tree or The Pineapple Thief or Gazpacho that don't know of Bowness's work. And I think that's because what makes him really compelling isn't always apparent at a quick listen. He's someone where the full craft of what he's doing takes some time to unlock and, draws on the aesthetic standards of a couple of different kind of songwriting traditions that aren't always involved in the kind of music he tends to get lumped in with. And his work doesn't necessarily have the surface qualities of flashiness or obvious kind of technical skill or density that might motivate certain types of listeners to pay closer attention. And the closest comparisons I can probably think of are Peter Hamill and David Sylvian, right? Not that, obviously he doesn't have he hasn't been prolific on the scale that Hamill has, right? Because that would basically be impossible. And he hasn't covered quite the range that Sylvian has, because again, that would basically be impossible. But those are two figures who've combined a finely developed songwriting voice and a very distinct and compelling recorded presence as performers, right? And then also a range of sounds and styles that is conversant with, but not limited by, progressive rock. Now, I've never had any sense that he is unhappy with his level of success or respect, right? So I'm not trying to write some kind of grave injustice here. He seems like someone who's happy when he can work on and be immersed in music. Obviously, he's been able to do both those things to a pretty great extent, so, everything's fine. And I do have the sense that he's probably more popular and better known in Europe and the UK, right? My sense of his obscurity may be somewhat influenced by living in the US. But I do feel pretty strongly about my admiration for his work, and I really wanted to make an extended case for that feeling. So I'm going to go into more detail about some of what I see as his core strengths as an artist, and I'll end with a list of some recommendations for things to check out if you're interested in hearing more of his work, seeing examples of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So when I was doing my reviews of the Peter Hamill albums a month or two ago, some of the comments said that I was too focused on lyrics, and I'll freely cop to that, right? I am a very lyrics-focused listener for whatever reason. It's a quirk of how I pay attention. And I understand that not everybody pays as much attention as I do, or, cares about the details of lyrics as much as I do, and I think that might be part of why his work is underrated. Now, as far as what makes those lyrics good, I mean, part of it is just a level of attention to quality writing, an awareness of the basics of how to avoid cliche, how to avoid stock phrases and predictable rhymes, right? But he's also very interested in the details of narrative and character in a way that let him explore emotional complexities above the kind of standard set of normal pop song emotional setups. There's something that he says in the liner notes to the No Man album, Schoolyard Ghosts, that I'm going to quote it a little bit of length here because I think it sets this up really well. From Sweetheart Raw onwards, I'd been preoccupied by how single moments, some obviously significant, others seemingly trivial, could determine the course of lives or linger in the memory. And that method, that fixation on moments and details and how they influence and shape and kind of haunt a life, that lends a certain level of cohesion to his whole kind of set of work. And that interest in scenes and moments gives his lyrics a kind of a narrative cinematic quality that I think works really well with kind of the lush widescreen quality of a lot of the sounds that he uses. Now, I'm not going to throw a bunch of quotes from the lyrics at you here because I think even very good lyrics don't have their full impact if if you don't have the musical setting and the singer's voice and delivery, right? Like I said, I'll offer some songs at the end of this video if you want to hear some of the examples of things that I regard as good pieces of his writing in their full context. I will give you one passage here from the song Post-its. You were young and I was younger, but that's all right. We spent a lifetime devising plans to spend the night. We spent a nighttime devising plans to waste our lives. We spent forever just testing ways to twist the knife. So the portrait that's being painted of this relationship is emotionally complex in a way that is very characteristic of his work. And the repeated, phonetic, syntactic structure of the last three lines there, that's enjoyable just on the level of the aesthetics of language, right? It has a poetic quality that works well. But I think it's also evocative of the kind of repetitive quality of young relationships, right? The way that time kind of passes in spirals in those kinds of young, emotionally intense, kind of dysfunctional love affairs. So there's a theme there being recapitulated in the structure of the language. And I think that's smart as hell. And a lot of his writing really does bear that kind of thought and analysis. So like a lot of people, I started listening to No Man after being a fan of Porcupine Tree. And it took me about 15 years, actually, from buying In Absentia when it first came out to buying Together We're Stranger in 2017. And a lot of the reason I waited so long was because it was very odd to me that you would, if you have Steven Wilson in your band, why would you have somebody else be the singer? I couldn't think of a reason why a project like that would exist. So if you read the Amazon reviews of some of the No Man albums, you'll encounter actually a lot of criticism from people who are coming to the band from Porcupine Tree and who see Bowness's singing as being a little bit affected or monotone. And I'll admit that I had a similar impression at first, but over time I've actually come to think of him as a riveting singer. And not just that, but as somebody whose chosen style is really carefully crafted to match with what he's doing. So first of all, one of the virtues of his style is clarity, right? It seems like he has deliberately developed a way of singing where you can pay careful attention to what he's saying, without having to dig out the booklet. Or look a lyric up online if you don't have a hard copy. And I mean, I think that that's very important for the level of craft that he's clearly putting into the words. And the thing is that he's singing lyrics about, a lot of the time, that are about kind of complex or ambiguous feelings that I don't think necessarily lend themselves well to what's thought of as conventionally expressive singing, right? And what he's doing is he's finding a way to maintain emotional intensity in the delivery in spite of some of the emotional ambiguity of what's being sung. So rather than trying to sing in a way that is modulated to the emotional tone of the characters, what he's doing instead is singing in a kind of intense devotional focus, right? He sings in a way that suggests total engagement with what he's doing as a singer without trying to conventionally mirror the emotion of the song. Again, that's a smart approach that I think makes a lot of sense relative to, what he's doing in the lyrics. He seems to have thought a lot about the best way to sing, to deliver what he's doing as a writer. And his singing style is distinctive enough to make it an acquired taste, right? Which I think is often things that are a little bit jarring or unusual at first listen, a lot of the time end up being the most effective to a long-term listener. And as I've realized the kind of meaning and value of what he's doing, he's gone from initially being someone where I was listening around the vocals a bit to all the way over to being someone who I will generally seek out as a singer, no matter what kind of sonic context he's being put into, which actually ties to some of what I'm going to say in the next section. So if he's a really, thoughtful, attentive writer and a very distinctive and compelling singer, I think what really makes his overall catalog impressive is his talent as either as an arranger and a soundscaper, or, his wisdom in finding the appropriate collaborators to create the right sonic bed for what he's doing. So I think the first thing that means is, because he has a very distinct vocal delivery, a very distinct vocal style, he's able to incorporate a lot of different sounds and atmospheres and genres into what he does and still have it maintain cohesion. He reminds me a bit of Radiohead or Low in that regard. Those are both bands that are able to be sonically quite adventurous and quite diverse because they're anchored by a very distinct, identifiable vocal and lyrical sensibility. So while his default mode is a kind of hazy art rock, he can mix in touches of country or electronica or synth pop or metal and make those things seem cohesive because the distinct lyrical focus, the distinct vocal delivery, tie those things together and kind of bring out their underlying emotions. And the second thing is that his arrangements and his instrumental writing, or the arrangements and writing that are appearing on his albums, whether that's him or his collaborators, consistently, I think those show a level of depth that evades casual listening. There are a lot of his songs that I might have heard 8 or 9 or 10 times before I happened to really pay attention to a particular detail or a particular part that kind of went above just the normal verse-chorus progression, or before I really thought about how a particular instrumental flourish or arrangement choice kind of fit conceptually with what he was singing about, and then really unlocked how well crafted that song was as a soundscape and as kind of a fusion of sound and idea. So the last thing I'm going to do is talk about some of my favorite Bowness tracks. I think that'll maybe give you a good idea of some of what I'm talking about. So this album is a bit older than a lot of the other stuff that is solo rather than no man work, and it's a wonderful album. It has these kind of enveloping synth tones from Richard Barbieri, and it has this kind of consistent dark late night mood where the particular intensity of his writing and singing is really very well matched by the atmosphere. Now, this particular song seems at a casual listen to be about romantic devotion. Turns out, if you pay more attention, it's actually about the wish for martyrdom and a holy war. That's a trick that I don't know if I can totally imagine him doing now. You know, his current work sticks to somewhat more grounded topics. But it's a really compelling idea, and the kind of, like I said earlier, the sort of almost devotional intensity of how he delivers the words really fits remarkably well with the text. I like this example because it's a relatively optimistic song in a catalog that's often focused on loss and melancholy, but it makes that optimism credible. Earlier in this video, I mentioned the cinematic quality to the lyrics, and this has some lines that are very effective in that way. You stare at all the buildings, and you know that something's changed. You look down from the rooftop, hearing sirens through the rain. The way that he keeps coming back to that detail over the course of the song, hearing sirens through the rain, that's very key to the idea that I mentioned earlier about how memories and feelings can crystallize around certain details of a memory. And Giancarlo Erra's work here is really beautiful. You know, he does a lot of kind of that calm Floydian sprawl. Sonically, it's a great fit for this song, and there's a climactic guitar solo that really drives the feeling home. This is a song I really like that also consistently makes me feel good, and I almost never like music that makes me feel good, so there you go. So the lyric to this song is a really compassionate and rich description of the ennui of a woman who hasn't really found meaning or purpose or love in middle age. Once again, there's this complex layering of past and present, right? And the way that the past haunts the present. There's some quite clever lines, you know. At one point, she imagines her youthful self as a girl the dads could laugh with. And that line contains worlds, you know. But what's really great here is the false ending, right? Where the song kind of holds its breath for a second, and then there's this great big crash of loud guitar and synthesizer. And the whole thing takes a nosedive into sheer blackness that really evokes the way that, you know, day-to-day ennui can occasionally just kind of nosedive in despair. I really can't imagine any other artist writing this very careful, thoughtful, detailed character study, which really would work pretty well just as an acoustic song, and then adding this great big fucking heavy rock coda. I think it's very emblematic of what makes Bowness special as an artist. So this comes at the end of a conceptual cycle spread across several albums about a washed-up progressive rock star. And it's a beautiful evocation of that character's relationship to nostalgia. And it's a beautiful evocation of that character's relationship to nostalgia and the memory of how music made him feel when he was young. And the kind of rising of that memory is sonically embodied by this gorgeous, haunting, kind of ghostly flute solo from Ian Anderson, which is a really brilliant kind of mesh of subject and theme and style and arrangement technique. It's a great example of the kind of thing that I mean, where he creates these things that are compelling enough at a surface listen, but that also have these additional levels of thoughtful detail into you know, how the music and lyric are fitting into and complementing each other. So there's an aspect of electronica to some of Bowness's work. He's done a couple albums really with, you know, purely electronic artists. So I thought it was important to have something on this list that captured that. So this is a great lyric and performance, and it has some really wonderful enveloping synth tones from Peter Chilvers. But what I particularly like about this song is the way that the voice is used as a textural instrument, right? The way he's delivering the lyric and then at the same time also kind of weaving himself into the sonic fabric of the song. All right, so thanks for listening to my thoughts. If you're a dedicated fan of Bowness's work, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. It feeds my ego. And check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or whatever your preferred streaming service is. Thanks much for your time, and I'll see everybody next week.